So the grid panel is where we're going to show the customer's order history. And so we can actually show you that auto columns thing without cheating.
Yes, we can. OK, so grid panel, orders grid.
So again, we're setting a couple of IDs so that our different pieces of code can access it. So we're calling this one the orders grid. Phil's setting the title real quick by actually clearing out the title, just double-clicking to inline edit. We're all about these shortcuts. We're disabling selection here because there's nothing special to do in this grid other than look at it. He's associating it with a store now. So what store is going to populate this grid?
So we'll run into this later, but I think we named the store wrong, but that's OK. We'll fix it later. OK, so grid panel, clear title, store, auto columns. Let's do our stuff.
So handy dandy trick. Now all of our auto columns are there, and because the stores were set up to pull data, you'll see it's already populated with data live in Architect.
So order number. What are we doing here? We're doing
text? So we're going to change the text on order number to just say order. And we're probably going to change the types of a couple fields and maybe remove some that we don't care about.
Yes.
So you may do auto columns, and you find, well, in this particular view, I care about only 2/3 of these columns. So in this case, we're going to do that. We're going to remove a few.
So it does this already, as far as the date, but that's OK. Date.
Yep.
So we're going to remove subtotal.
Yeah, I believe we're going to remove subtotal, shipping, and tax. And then we're going to, you can also rearrange columns very easily. We're just going to make balance the rightmost column after we remove tax.
Yes, sir.
I'm jumping ahead too fast here.
No, it's OK. What did you want to do with the last column?
We want to make balance the last column. So we're gonna just reorder those columns. You just drag it. You'll see the grid updates. Boom.
Also note that you can drag it here, I believe. Well, maybe I'm lying. OK, cool. All right, let's save that. All right, so main viewport.
Yep. So now we're going to add a main viewport, and this is really where all the magic happens. So we've added a few separate components, but we have no logic to decide what to display and what's populated with. So we're going to add a main viewport here. And what we're going to do after we add this main viewport is we're going to link in the components that we've built, and then we're going to write some controller logic to decide which component to show and how to populate that.
So viewbox, padding.
So again, we're just doing a little bit of styling. We knew ahead of time, what would make this look a little bit nicer. So Phil's adding some padding in there. Show you the code view. Yeah, since there's nothing to look at here, you can see it's generating the code. It's all in the layout.
Can we talk about initial view?
Yes. So your app needs to have an initial view. We're going to make this our initial view so that when we load the app, the first component that's loaded is going to be this viewport, or whichever thing you've marked as initial view.
Yes. And if you look in, actually, you can't look here, but you could look in the code behind. OK, so main viewport. It's not much going on, but it's about to become very populated.
Yes.
OK, so we're going to add a container.
So in this viewport, we're going to have a container. And this container is going to be where kind of the magic happens. So we're going to give this container a layout of card. And we're going to use our views that we've built as cards. And we're going to swap them out based on controller actions. So first, we're going to give it an item ID so that we can access it by code. And you'll see how we access that stuff in the controllers in a brief minute here.
And there's a million configs we're setting here. Know that in the config pane, if you want to know what something does, you can hover over any of the question marks, and you'll get a sense of what's going on.
And it links right to our documentation as well.
Yes.
So if you're looking at something, you're like, what the heck does this do? You can always hover. You can always click and get right to the docs.
All right, so what's it doing? Frame true. Yes. OK, so let's drag in a couple of our stuff. So we're going to got to read my recipe here. Drag customers into the container. All right.
Yeah, so what we're going to do here is, I had mentioned earlier, we're going to link these in. So Phil is dragging it, dropping it into that card container where we're going to show these cards. And he's just making two little links, one to each of these components. And this is what's going to allow us to swap these in and out as cards.
OK, so now we're going to add. So you have me adding basic function. Cool.
Yep.
For the breadcrumbs that we're going to add.
Yeah, so one thing that every good web app has is breadcrumbs, so to help you with navigation. So we're going to add a basic breadcrumb function that we've pre-canned. You already saw us do it here as a method of cheating, and you may have seen it in the touch presentation prior. If you have a series of components that you reuse that you've built in your inspector, you can right-click it. You can say, save this, and then you can reuse it. And so you'll see these green little puzzle piece icons. So as the breadcrumbs come forward, maybe Phil is setting up the code for that. But you'll see we'll drag out a pre-canned component that's just got a few things arranged for our breadcrumbs, and you'll see what that looks like.
Do we talk about this at all, or?
Yeah, let's go through this. So what this does is it selects the card container, and it's going to shift off the component from the cards and set the titles in the breadcrumbs. So what it's going to do is it's going to go through the list of current cards in the stack, right? And it's going to make your breadcrumbs out of that stack. So the first one is always going to be called home. And in our case, in our example, we only ever have one underneath that. But if you had a lot of depth, if you were like 5 deep into your application, it would say home, page 1, page 2, page 3, et cetera, in your breadcrumbs. So that you can click any of those and go back to that card. So you'll see our breadcrumbs showing up there now. We're going to put them at the top, as any good navigation would.
And we're going to clear.
I believe you might need to clear your flex, yeah.
Yes.
Now it doesn't take up so much space. We don't need half the screen for breadcrumbs. I think you should be OK without setting height.
OK. I'll trust you.
That's a foolish mistake.
Yes. OK, so a little bit of style?
Yeah, for sure. So we're going to add our style sheet. I told you that we cheated ahead of time. We had a CSS sheet already put together because you don't want to watch us do that, especially with the exciting themer stuff, which is the session after ours. So Miro and Arna in the back will be talking about the new theming tools in Architect 3. So we're going to cheat a little bit, just import a CSS resource. And so we already had the CSS file created. You'll need to drag that down to the library.
I will. I think I can do this. OK, fine.
So we add that as a resource, and we just give it a URL. So we save this into our empty project already in a resources folder. So we just called it, I think, is it app.css? It should be in the script.
It is.
There you go. So if we switch back to design view.
No, hold on, that must be wrong. So style.css.
Style.
I knew it was wrong because there was nothing in there. All right.
There we go. So there's our CSS. You'll see we have a lot of it. We figured it would be pretty boring to write all of that. So.
All right, it's looking a little nicer.
Yeah.
OK, so let's start adding some user interaction. Do you want to switch with me? And
yeah, I'll go ahead and do the controller.
Awesome. All right, so we have all this stuff, and we've added a detail panel. But still, if we open up the browser and you click, nothing would happen. So we're going to start by adding our controller so we can start making things happen. So we'll add controller, and what do we call that?
I'm going to go ahead and set it a user class name.
Yes. Main controller. Awesome.
We're going to set up our stores with this controller.
Sure. And setting stores and views and models in your controller, it's already on the application. But setting it on the controller is a way for you to say, I don't want to load these if you're doing dynamic loading, or if you're only using some views in a certain app. When you build it with command, it will only use the things that you're requiring. So we're going to make sure all our requires are set up correctly. So what he's doing here is we're going to add, I think, 4 references. Mm-hmm. And what references are basically a quick way for your controllers to get access to your views or your stores or what have you. And it uses component query. So earlier when you saw us setting item IDs, and so we were being a little bit careful about how we name them and casing. And that's the reason. So we're going to add these. And if you take a look at the code view,
sure, I'll jump out to that in a second.
Yep. Cool. So now you see 4 refs. We're actually using a couple different styles of query selectors. The first one, we're using an alias main that we had set. And we're using an item ID, which is pound cards. And we're saying, I only want the child of main, which is that greater than symbol. If you use CSS and Sass, it's the same style. The second one, we're just using an alias as well, or the X type is another. We call it alias in Architect, but it's an X type or a P type, or depending on the type of component you're talking about. The third is the main, and that is also referenced above in the customers, but that's the main viewport. And we set an alias on the main viewport as well. And the last one is just using an item ID as well. So you'll see us when we start to write code. We'll start saying things like get card container. And that's a nice thing that controllers add when you add these references. So let's add some actions. All right, so the first thing we're doing is we're saying, hey, here's my target type. And one of the nice things that, whoops, it's probably at the top, right?
Yep, it is.
OK. So we have all the things in your project at the top. And if it's one of the things you're trying to target, you can click it, and it will automatically set it to that type. And the reason you set a target type is so that Architect knows, here are the events that I can possibly use. And if it's a button, there's going to be things like click events. So
I'm cheating with my script here so I don't mess up code.
Sure. OK. So this is the activate on the breadcrumbs. And the name is slightly crazy, but it won't matter.
Yeah,
on
we'll fix that.
breadcrumbs activate. We try to auto-generate names, but name them yourself. Like, name them something that's human readable for you. So what this is going to do is when the breadcrumbs gets activated, which is any time it comes into view, we're going to run this code. It's going to get the card container using that that controller ref. It's going to get that controller's layout, and it's basically going to do is set an active item. And you're going to see once we pull it up, you're going to see the breadcrumbs, and if you click home, it's going to move you back to the home in the card view.
So I'm going to add a couple more actions now.
Sure. OK, so the action he's adding right now is going to be when you're in that first dashboard and you're viewing the charts on the top and the images on the right, and you have that grid we created what feels like a century ago, you're going to click these customers, and it's going to basically move you to the detail view. Again, it's going to use the card layout and just set the active component.
All right, got a little code behind again.
And I'll do a little bit of explaining when we go to the full code view on a couple things right here. On customer select. And you can't use commas there.
Whoops, that's true.
Yeah. You can add them, yes. And if you hit tab there after your first parameter, you can keep hitting tab and adding and tab and adding and tab and adding.
Let's see this. Talk about this code real quick.
Sure. So I actually sort of talked about it already, but basically, like I said, we're gonna use component query. We're gonna first set the detail card and say, hey, here's the customer I care about, right? And then we're gonna switch the layout to move it to the new detail panel. And finally, we're gonna say order store load with particular arguments.
Add one more action.
Which is named wrong, by the way, your order store.
Yep.
Just wanted to make sure you knew that. OK, so now we're targeting a component, which probably means
this is our activate.
Yes, for the main.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is going to be code that runs anytime the main the main viewport gets shown. And
should we explain this control query? It's a little.
Well, show me in the full code view, and I'll do it.
Let me paste in our function real quick.
This is just updating the breadcrumbs.
Yep.
OK, so I was wrong. This is not on the main viewport. This is actually being targeted. So the main viewport, and under that, we're going to find
oops, got me.
We're going to find that card container that we added. And anytime that gets activated, we're going to update the breadcrumbs to say, hey, we've moved to the detail panel. Let's update the breadcrumbs in the top there. So where are we at now?
Well, that's actually all the code. So
let's see what we broke.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. I'm hoping that something is broken so we can sort of run through how do you figure out what you did wrong.
Nothing's broken.
Well,
actually, almost.
Breadcrumbs aren't working.
Yeah, and that's probably because it needs to be linked to the proper spot. Let's move that back where it, whoops. Move that back where it was.
And you saw he quickly there, he did Control Z. All the top level components has a history stack. So you can actually go undo and redo. There's no global history stack, so it's not going to, if you undo 3 times, it's not going to go to the thing you were at last. There's a lot of reasons for that. I won't go into that for this session. But you can think about each of these classes as a file. So if you're in a text editor and you chose you were in a particular tab for your customer detail, if you hit Control Z, it's never going to switch to the other tab and do it. You'd be like, that's wrong. So we're treating all these things as first-class files, and they're classes as well.
I'm cheating, Phil.
Oh, I thought we were going to do a little debugging session.
Well, this one was our mystery one that we've already run into.
OK.
So there's our breadcrumbs.
OK. Well, we didn't show them debugging. Actually, there was no errors, I don't think. So
there weren't actually.
Yeah. It was probably a controller query, which
yeah.
we feel your pain too. We're hopefully going to work hand in hand with the framework teams to make that stuff better. So.
See something with a lot of orders here.
Yep. Do you want to sort? I mean, I'm sure everyone here has seen grids, but you can click sort and it'll switch. And what are we talking about next? Are we moving to Q&A or are we?
Yeah, I think that's really it. We just wanted to show you how quickly and easily you could build an app in Architect. Obviously, we cheated a little bit, but we compressed into a little over a half an hour what could realistically be done if you know what your goals are and you've got the app designed in really a couple to a few hours.
Can you open Sublime Text to our project?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit about the makeup of an Architect app and how it's really not different at all from using command or by hand creating these individual files yourself.
Let me pop up the font size.
Take a look at a little bit of like what was created here.
Can you guys see this in the back? Is this readable?
Yeah. OK.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we would switch to the code view. But it's much easier to see this here. On the left-hand side, you have the directory for the project, which is SC13. There's an app directory, just like you've come to expect if you're not using Architect. It uses conventions, controllers, and views, and stores are all stored in their respective folders. The things that are added here, and we'll look at the app.js in a second, but there's the metadata directory. And that's all the information that Architect needs to know to regenerate your app. And earlier, I talked about how we are able, with a tap of a button, to upgrade your XJS project from 4.2 to 4.3, 4.4, and 5, and all that stuff. The reason we know how to do that is because we know more information than just reading your JavaScript. So that's what those metadata files are doing. What else do you want to show?
Probably the structure of the app. We can just show the example really quick of, let's show a view, because that's pretty complex and has a lot of items.
Sure.
I think it'd just be good to show.
Sure.
Well,
and you see here, we're just defining, and we didn't change our app name, my app. We could have called it Ping Pong or PongCon or whatever. But if you do that and you resave it, it'll save, regenerate all your JavaScript.
Yeah. See, like in the generated code for the customer detail, where we had like a big hierarchy of components, you'll see it looks just like what you've done in XJS before. We've got our items list here, so we've got the panel inside it. We've got the container inside there. That's got a button inside it. Grid panel. So this looks exactly like code any Sencha employee or Sencha user hopefully would generate.
Right. And that's earlier I talked about getting to the code that matters, the customer feature, or this extra view that's going to help drive sales. That's the goal from all the developers at Architect. It's not Visual Studio yet, but that's we're moving every day into that direction to make it a first-class and a world-class application builder. So. Go back to the slides. I think maybe there's. See what's next.